Okay, we are going to be creating a couple shapes and kind of learning how to manipulate them. Um, so we're going to look at our toolbar here. Kind of a similar setup to your other programs, InDesign and Photoshop, but a couple different. Any version you might have more tools. We're looking kind of just at the basic one, so feel free to explore. Um, but I wanted to show you a couple things. So I'm going to pull out this rectangle tool. Okay, so I'm going to select it. I'm going to kind of zoom in, Command plus. If I hold down my spacebar key, I can move the page and grip it by holding down the spacebar key. So I'm holding down the spacebar key and clicking with my trackpad mouse. Okay, so I've got my rectangle tool and I'm going to make a rectangle, just clicking and dragging it. Here it is. I'm going to increase the stroke. As you can see, I'm making like the frame of it thicker. And then you can notice in the color, it's not very obvious since the inside or the fill of this shape is white, but this is where the coloring is controlled. Okay, so the fill is the area inside, and the stroke is right here. You click on it so you can manipulate it, but that is the frame. It's possible for you to not have a stroke, so it's an invisible line, which works out very well for certain purposes. When you start your illustration project, there will be instances where you do not have a stroke. Um, and to change any of these colors, right now we're at white fill, black stroke, you would, right here, okay, this is your black arrow tool, your selection tool, you click on it, and you'll know it's selected. And right here, you'll see the fill is going to be on top, so you can actually get your swatches. If it's not open, make sure you open it up and you can just click and you can change the color. Okay, if you are like wanting a different color, you can double click. You can make your own custom color. It doesn't have to come from the swatches panel. So you can play around with the color picker and then you click OK and there it is. Since this is still selected, I'm going to change the color of the stroke. I zoom in, I can see it a little bit better. And I want to change the color of that stroke. I want to make it just something very obvious. Okay, so that's the color of the stroke. It is now kind of like this orangey color. For the stroke, you can control the color as we just did, and you can control the width of it or the weight. So the higher, it's right here up on my toolbar, the higher this point size, the stroke weight, the thicker it is. There's a drop down here, and you're more than welcome to click on one of those numbers, or you can actually set it yourself and fill it in if you have a more precise need. Um, the stroke is default a uniform stroke, but you can actually switch it and you can kind of see what that does. They all kind of, you see how it kind of manipulates it from not just a straight line. And so you can kind of play around with that. Again, you might not need it all the time, but it's good to know that it is there for when you get into more custom shapes. Okay. If you go back to your rectangle tool, you'll see like this little triangle at the corner. If you hold that down, you will see that there are sub shapes. So rounded rectangle, ellipse, polygon, star tool, and flare tool. Okay, so I'm going to pick the ellipse. So now when I click and drag, it's going to make an ellipse. If I hold down my shift key, it will hold the proportion so it makes a circle, a perfect circle. Okay, so if you hold down your shift key, it will make a shape that is proportional, because not ellipses are circles and not all rectangles are squares. So I can go back to my rectangle tool, and if I click and drag and I hold down my shift key, it makes a square that's perfect. Okay, on both sides, perfectly even on all sides. So you can change the color. So all of these shapes do not have to be the same exact color. So you can practice changing colors if you'd like. So please do that, because you're going to be making various shapes once we get the hang of this. Okay, and so for us to move these shapes, okay, so once we've made it, once to move it, if you want to move it, you'll get your black arrow tool, you'll click, and you will drag it where you want it. Okay, so you can actually drag it outside of your artboard. Remember, because when we zoomed out, all this white space is part of my document. If you want to change its size or shape, you can click and drag the corners. You can move this. If you want to make it larger and keep the dimensions, you can hold down your shift key when you drag the corners, and it will keep the proportion. Another thing that's very fun to do is if you want to rotate your shape. So if you have, select your object, and you're going to hover near the corner, and you're going to be able to rotate the shape. Okay, any of the corners. There's also here a rotation tool. So you'll notice that if you click on that tool, you can click and drag and you can rotate the object, okay, around its access point. So I'm going to show you guys this. Right here, it's kind of hard to see since my color, my fill is almost the same color as that access point. But I'm going to select this shape. I'm going to select my rotate. This access point is where you are rotating around. Okay, does that make sense? I can, just by clicking, so while I'm on my rotate tool, I am clicking somewhere not in the center, just I can click, and then my rotation of the object, it goes around that axis. Okay, it's no longer centered in the shape. I can continue to kind of play with this axis, and then all of a sudden I can actually click so it's outside of that shape. I'll zoom out a little bit so you can see this. And when I rotate, it's rotating around this point. I'm just clicking and dragging. Okay. If I want to make a shape that rotates and make a copy of it, like let's say I want to make a rotation, an image that has like all the objects rotating around something. I'm going to select my object. Okay. I'm going to rotate it so you can see that I'm rotating it, right? And I'm going to hold down my Option key on my keyboard. I'm going to hold down my Option key. And you'll see that white arrow popping up, and I let go. I'm holding down my Option key, and I'm letting go. Holding down my Option key, and I'm letting go. Okay, so this will allow you to create a copy of these shapes as they are rotating around a certain point. Does that make sense? I'm going to do it again. This time we'll give you an object for it to be around. Okay, so here is my circle. And I'm going to make a square. I'm going to change colors of the square so you can okay. All right, so I'm gonna zoom out so you can see this. We're practicing rotating around an object while making copies of that shape. So here, and if it's helpful for you, I'm going to select that object that I want these squares to rotate around, and I'm going to make a guide. So I pulled onto the ruler my mouse, I hovered over it and I click and I'm dragging. You can see, right? So now I'm going to select the square. I'm going to hit this rotate tool. Okay. And I'm going to move that axis. Move the access point, I just have to click the center of that circle. Okay. Now, when I rotate and I hold down my Option key, I'm rotating around the circle. Okay, so you can create objects that rotate around a certain access point. Okay, might take a little bit of practice, but you're gonna try and do one of those for your assignment, okay, along with other things, but that's one component. So we'll keep that the next tool starting the next video. But, you know, in this video, you've made shapes, you've been able to move the shapes, and then you're learning how to make them bigger and smaller and how to rotate and duplicate around an access point. Okay, because this might be important for your other future projects because we're building our skills. So you know, make a couple shapes, practice, you know, change the fill and the stroke. And then when you feel comfortable enough, you might not feel comfortable at all, but it's okay. You got to try. Try the rotating. Okay. All right. Until the next one.